if you took a running pool of executives throughout the National Football League and fans throughout the National Football League, I think you would get a common answer when it comes to the question of name one of the worst organizations in the National Football League over the past 10 to 15 years in terms of the entirety of their body of work during that period of time. There's no question in my mind that one of the leading candidates to win that poll question, if not the runaway winner, would be the Cleveland Browns. This has been a bad organization for an extended period of time, pretty much for the most part, with a little glitch here or there, ever since they came back into the league in the 1999 season. I mean, this is an organization that perfectly fits that motto of the true definition of insanity is doing something and then having it not work, then doing the same thing again, having it not work again, only to do it again, thinking the result is going to be any different. So therefore, you do the same thing, get the same result, and then do the same damn thing again. You get the idea. The Cleveland Browns have largely been a dysfunctional mess. Poor coaching hires, a terrible front office leadership, a terrible ownership, you name it, it's pretty much across the board. And you look at 2014 for the Cleveland Browns heading into this season, and there was maybe a little bit of hope that things were going to get a little better for this team, but there was also that kind of fear of where the Cleveland Browns going to do the same old crap. And I will put it to you this way. This wasn't exactly all the way the same old Cleveland Browns. First and foremost, head coach Mike Pettin and general manager Ray Farmer appear to have survived into the 2015 season. That's a big step, a major step, a major area of improvement for this organization. In order to win in the National Football League, you have to have some type of continuity, some type of consistency. And that has been one of the biggest things that has plagued this Browns franchise for years. Is too much turnover at head coach, too much turnover in the front office. Now they've got some continuity. Now they've got some stability, and that's a good thing. That's something that could potentially pay dividends for this organization. And if you're a Cleveland Browns fan, you had moments where you really believed in this team in 2014 and you thought, this team could do some things and maybe even not so much this year, but down the road. I mean, you're talking about a Cleveland Browns team, for God's sakes, that was 7-4 after 11 games this season. Talk about a Cleveland Browns team that even if they would have went on to win 9 or 10 games, you might be looking at head coach Mike Pettin as the clear runaway choice for NFL Coach of the Year, and he would have deserved it. At 7-4, you're talking about they're in the mix of the divisional race in the AFC North. At the very worst, they're right in the mix, right in the heat of the battle when it came to a wild card spot. I mean, things were really looking good for the Cleveland Browns. They were sitting there and finding a way ways to win games. They were winning games in an ugly fashion, winning games that they maybe should lose, which is sometimes a trademark of a good team. And then the last 5 games of the season happened, and they lost them all. And that was kind of typical Cleveland fashion. And there's a plethora of reasons for that. Namely, when it came to losing those last 5 games of the year, a lot of the focus shifted to the offensive side of the ball. They finally got Josh Gordon back, and Josh Gordon really wasn't the same Josh Gordon you remembered from 2013. Brian Hoyer, who had kind of toiled in average to mediocre quarterback play all year, was even worse. So they finally decided to go to Manziel and leave it to the Cleveland Browns when Hoyer, about midseason, was really showing that he's not going to be any better than Manziel. Maybe it's time to go with the rook and get him some experience so that way he can potentially win you some games late in the year. They wait too long. They sit on Hoyer for too long. And then when they decide to play Johnny football, finally it's against the Cincinnati Bengals in his first start. It's not exactly a formula for success. You have injuries to Jordan Cameron. I mean, just some typical Cleveland Browns stuff, frankly. You have your other first-round pick in Justin Gilbert, who was really not much of a factor, especially in the early portion of this season. You look at the Cleveland Browns, and it's funny. This is a team that you thought with Josh Gordon and Jordan Cameron and a really good offensive line was going to be able to put up some points and move the ball consistently maybe in 2014. And that just really didn't happen, frankly. They had those moments, they had those spurts where they could put up some points on the board, but far too often they fell victim to falling behind. Far too often they fell victim to having long spurts of completely, totally ineffective play on offense. This is a team that offensively finished 27th in the league in points scored, 23rd in total yards. This was not a good offensive unit. And when you look at the defensive side of the ball, you brought in a defensive-minded head coach. There were some assumptions there that the defensive side of the ball was in much better condition. You have guys like Joe Hayden. You have somebody like a Carlos Dansby that you bring in via free agency. You have Paul Kruger. There's some talent there. So the assumption was maybe that this defense was going to carry this team. But early on in the season, this Cleveland Browns defense was terrible. They got better as the season goes along. But when you look at the numbers and you see that they finished 9th in the league in points allowed, I think that's a little misleading because there were times where this defense just really couldn't stop anybody. I mean, 23rd in the league in total yards allowed, butt naked last in the league in rush yards allowed per game, and 28th in the league in sacks. So let me put it to you this way. It might look like they played okay when you look at the points allowed, but when you figure that they were the worst team in the National Football League when it came to stopping the run, and they were 28th in sacks, meaning they were failing to consistently generate a pass rush on opposing quarterbacks, that basically meant that opposing offenses could impose their will on the defense. So it's not hard to figure out that at some point in time, reality kind of caught up with this Cleveland Browns team in 2014. And while they had a great start, going 7-4, eventually the floor kind of fell out from under them. And I guess it was bound to happen at some point in time. But losing their last 5 games, if you're a Browns fan, how optimistic do you really feel about 2015 going forward? What did this season really accomplish? You realize that Josh Gordon might never take this game seriously, that Justin Gilbert and Johnny Manziel could look like 2 tragic draft mistakes. How optimistic are you about this Browns team after a 7-9 season? And it's funny because if you'd asked a lot of Browns fans at the start of the season how you would feel if this team went 7-9 in 2014, you probably feel really good. But how good do you really feel? When you look at their offseason, they brought in Ben Tate, and by the 3/4 point in the season, you've cut him. You bring in Carlos Dansby. He's an okay player at this stage of his career still, but this is a guy that's not the same player that he once was. You look at the draft, and this was an area where the Cleveland Browns really needed to make an impact in 2014. This was really a way that they needed to hit it big because this is the way they were going to rebuild their franchise. And you look at the draft, it's very much a mixed bag. I mean, they definitely hit a home run with Joel Bitonio out of Nevada, the offensive lineman in the 2nd round. To me, he was the best offensive lineman rookie in the National Football League in 2014. You look at a guy like Terrence West in the 3rd round. He played well at times. Christian Kirksey, I thought, played well at times on the inside in that 3-4 defense. Isaiah Crowell, an undrafted player. He was the guy that to me looked like the best running back the Browns had in 2014. So they got some contributions out of this draft class. But to me, they got very little out of Justin Gilbert, their 1st-round pick, and they got even less out of Johnny Manziel, their 1st-round pick franchise quarterback. They kind of fit a similar mold of the guys like the Brady Quinns of the worlds and the Brandon Whedons of the worlds that came before them. They had taken somebody else with 1 1st-round pick, and then they took that quarterback later on. And when you look at the Browns here, to me, when I look at that 2014 draft, I can sit there now. And I said it at the time when it came to that first of the 2 1st-round picks, that they had taken Justin Gilbert to me was very questionable, and I really didn't particularly understand that. In a class that was so deep and so loaded at wide receiver, you have Odell Beckham Jr. sitting on the board. You don't have Josh Gordon for the majority of the season, and even if you did, you really have nothing else at that wide receiver position, and you prioritize a cornerback in the 1st round. Something's just not right with that picture, and something's just not adding up. And then when you look at the fact that they took Manziel, when maybe safer players like Bridgewater and Carr were still on the board, it's just like even if the Browns do something good, they take 1 step forward and they take 2 steps back. And if they don't get more out of Gilbert and Manziel in 2015, it's going to set this organization back for years. And while everybody can sit there and praise the Browns for having 2 1st-round picks, making that trade, out of that 4th overall pick in 2014 where the Bills moved up to get Sammy Watkins, when you look at what they did with the pick, one of the picks they got, they traded back from 4 to 9, and then they moved up from 9 to 8 to get Justin Gilbert. How much should you really be praising them? You can say what you want about Buffalo, but they sure seemed like at this moment they came out of that deal as big winners because at least they got Sammy Watkins. And yeah, having 2 1st-round picks again in this draft could bode tremendously well for the Cleveland Browns organization. But if they have another draft, and in particular a draft that I don't think is nearly as deep or talented as the 2014 draft, and they miss on 1 or both of those picks, then the Cleveland Browns will have made that trade and failed to cash in any way, shape, or form. Not drafting Odell Beckham Jr., as I kind of felt at the time, was a colossal mistake and a big disaster, and it proved it to be in 2014. When you look at this team in the offseason and what they need, first and foremost, they need Manziel and Gilbert to play like the first-round picks that they were. They need these guys to be professionals. They need these guys to stop being chodes and take their fucking job seriously. Then at that point in time, they need to go out there and find some help for Johnny Football on the offensive side of the ball. They need to go get some goddamn wide receivers. I don't know if you could really count on Josh Gordon anymore, and even if you can, you still need more help at that position. And what was really atrocious to me about the Browns in 2014, as with certain other teams in the NFL, it was a historically good wide receiver class, perhaps the best wide receiver class of all time. And a team like the Browns had such a tremendous need at the position that at no point in time in any of the 7 rounds of the 2014 NFL draft did they deem it appropriate or necessary to take a wide receiver. That's just inexcusable, and that's just ridiculous. And that makes you wonder and question the guys running those war rooms when it comes to the Cleveland Browns and the draft every year, and if they really truly get it or not. At no point in time did you take a wide receiver that was going to help your football team. That's just astounding to me. And then when you look at this team, like I said, this was a defense that ended up finishing 9th in the league in points allowed, but they were bad defense. They need help everywhere. Pretty much. I mean, how much more do you really want to invest in the corner position? I don't really know. But they definitely need some linemen in that 3-4. They need a real nose tackle. They need some impact players at the 5 technique end position. They definitely need an outside linebacker to complement Paul Kruger and provide a balanced pass rush on the other side from Kruger, because Barkevious Mingo is a bum. As I told you he was going to be. He is going to be a big bust. In 2 seasons, he has basically done nothing, just like Jarvis Jones in Pittsburgh. And even if Mingo had a good 2015 coming up next year, it doesn't matter. You still need more help at outside linebacker. You need help at inside linebacker. This Cleveland Browns team needs some impact players for Mike Pettin in that 3-4 defense. Like I said, if you had told me the Cleveland Browns were going to go 7-9 in 2014, I predicted that they would, but I wasn't sure if I believed it. I'd have been like, that's a really good season for the Cleveland Browns, and that's a good building block for the future. It will create some stability in the organization, and it will be a sign of better things to come. But now, as the season has wrapped up for the Cleveland Browns, I look at their 7-9 record and I say, is it really all that good? You started Hoyer most of the year, got nothing out of Manziel, and done nothing to establish one way or another whether or not he's going to be the long-term guy. You really didn't get much out of your other first-round pick, Justin Gilbert, and you managed to find a way to lose your last 5 games of the season. You didn't build positive momentum heading into next year. You potentially built some negative momentum. So did the Cleveland Browns really have that beneficial or successful of a 2014 season?